The woman sat in front of the mirror and brushed her hair. And yet again, she had that strange feeling that either there was somebody else there or she was two people. She wasn't quite sure what was going on. So she brushed her hair and she twisted it round her head. And then she took up that dark powder that everybody used round here. And she outlined her eyes. It was such fun. It looked different, and with hair different, like the people here. She felt different. And she thought about the year she'd just had. A year ago, she'd been found on the back of a horse, walking in a wood. She was unconscious, wrapped in a thick warm cloak with a bag on the back of the horse. She was taken to the lord of the manor's house, and it took her a while to recover. And when she did, she couldn't remember anything. They knew her name from something in her pack, introducing the Lady Emilia. But it didn't fit. She didn't feel like the Lady Emilia. She didn't know who she was. But she accepted the name. She accepted the hospitality. People were so kind. The first time she'd walked out into the wood was the first time she felt whole again, because she'd done something automatically. She'd put her hand out and picked herbs, knowing what they were. Picked berries, reached around for things. And then she'd gone back and she'd cooked. And that's when she learned she could cook beautifully. She may not remember who she was before. She may not remember her name. But she remembered how to cook. How to add those spices to a soup to make it special. How to put something excellent on a piece of meat so the taste changed. And best of all, she was good at baking. She added spices and herbs to bread, making them sweet or savoury. And her cakes and biscuits, those crispy, very fine biscuits with delicate tastes, oh, and cakes rich but edible. And so she was integrated into the society. And strangely enough, the person who eased her pathway was the Lord's mother, a widow. And she wasn't a friend, but she'd allowed the Lady Emilia to become part of the community. And especially as she now had a talent, it seemed to make things better. And over the last year, there had been good and there had been bad. And today she was inviting those who'd been nice to her, who'd looked after her, to a party. But for a brief moment, she thought about the bad, the muttering behind the hands, because she was a lone woman in this society. But far worse had been the hunt. Here, the hunt was for everybody, from the highest to the lowest. Men, women and children, they all seemed to go on the hunt. It was such a social occasion, like a carnival. Everybody arrived outside the big house. Wine, cider, warmed was served. There was the excitement, the chat, the dogs. It had been lovely. Until when they set off, there was the hunt horn, and she knew the chase was on, and something changed within her. She started to shake, to shiver. She couldn't breathe. She was frozen, and she wanted to be sick. They excused her. It's too soon. Go home. But she knew it was more than that. A deep fright of being chased. Something that even now she had to hide from herself. But today she was going to celebrate. Today she had cooked so much. She enjoyed cooking. She invited people to a beautiful room, warm, decorated. She'd invited musicians so that after they'd eaten, there would be music and they would share poems, stories, music and dance. And she had prepared so carefully the carrot and apple soup with the onions, oh, crispy onions on the top and a tiny bit of cheese. And then the roasts, the birds, coated, oh. And of course there was the cold ham, washed of its salt, cooked, pressed, covered in a plum jam, so that there was the savoury and the sweet. And then, of course, were the puddings and cakes, the custards with the cloves in, the big cakes and the little cakes, and finally the tiny biscuits. She enjoyed watching people eat. She enjoyed seeing them full and happy. It gave her great pleasure. And then afterwards the musicians played and they shared the songs, the poems, the stories. And it was then that one of the servants came in and said, a gentleman has asked if he could water his horses and did we have a crust to share? Here's a gentleman. So she'd gone and invited the gentleman in, an elegant young man who seemed pleasant enough. He didn't want to interrupt, but she said, you are here, you are welcome. And they fed him. And they even persuaded him to sing a song. And then the friends all said she must dance. So the musicians played and she danced. It was a dance of happiness, a dance that she wouldn't have been able to do 6 months ago. She danced and she felt proud of herself. And then she sat down and felt the glow of their applause and the warmth. And that's when she looked in the young man's eyes. And suddenly everything changed. It was like her life flashed. Different scenes flicking through her mind. And again, she felt that constriction of breath. She ran outside, and the young man knew. He followed. He reached out to grab her. She turned, and they looked at each other. And she knew him, and he knew her. He reached for a knife at his belt and grabbed at her. And now she knew her true nature. She shook and she wriggled and she changed. She was the snake. He grabbed her throat and she wriggled and changed. And now the fox. She whipped and she twirled and dropped to the ground. But he was on her quickly. But she shook one more time. She opened her arms and the dark wings came out, down. The dark, shiny feathers sprouting over her, and she shook him off, and the wings opened. And the Morrigan regained her mind, regained her power, and shot into the air, leaving her hunter on the ground. She'd had a year of freedom. She may have time in the future. She had shared in the food and the joy, and he couldn't take that away.